Russia seems to be shifting its strategy by saying it will withdraw forces from around Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv, to focus on the country's south and east. Benjamin Jensen is a senior fellow for the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, also a professor of strategic studies at the Marine Corps University. Ben, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So why do you think Russia has shifted its strategy? What are they trying to accomplish?
Great question. So Russia effectively has shifted its strategy because they're losing. Russia's attempt to rapidly change the regime in Ukraine while seizing territorial land bridges that would connect its territory it took in 2014 in the east to the Crimea effectively failed due to the bravery and brilliant operational defensive campaign waged by the Ukrainian forces, to include both their military and territorial defense forces, as well as citizens chipping in. These images of farmers with tractors towing away vehicles, and all of that aided and abetted by support from European and NATO member states who've been funneling weapons in. So the shift in strategy really pivots on failure to meet the initial campaign objectives.
So you say that this conflict's going to enter a new phase of, quote, frozen conflict. What does that mean?
So frozen conflict is traditionally a term used to describe how Russia has prosecuted campaigns in its near abroad since the end of the Soviet Union. And essentially what that is traditionally through irregular proxy forces and then using its own forces to be quote unquote peacekeepers. Russia will effectively annex, kind of a bite and hold, pieces of territory. Now, effectively, that strategy used to be a means of keeping countries like Georgia and Ukraine out of NATO, since NATO has an issue taking in new member states that have ongoing territorial disputes. I think a little different, though, than these past frozen conflicts is the current phase is really about recalibration. Meaning that Russia is going to figure out what it's going to do. They've had to pull back some of their top frontline units, like the VDV, some of their airborne forces, to Belarus, where they're currently regrouping and reconstituting. And frankly, only the Russians know what comes next. They could actually engage in good faith diplomacy and begin to look at a new solution for Ukraine, or they can actually use the time of bargaining, which many analysts think they will, to look at the next phase of their offensive. Will they go back to try to take Kiev, or as they've said in their own general staff, will they regroup to shift forces and attack in the east, trying to take more territory in Luhansk, Donetsk, and ideally for them, clearing Mariupol so they can connect to Crimea?
So how do you think the U.S. should take advantage of that shift in Russia's strategy and this new phase of the conflict?
Continue to supply intelligence and weapons. Obviously, we've put a clear prohibition against putting uniformed combatants from the United States or NATO member states inside Ukraine. But that doesn't prevent us from actually providing critical weapon systems. And when I say critical weapon systems, what I mean is engage in the highest form of strategy, which is to attack your opponent's plan. It's an old idea from Sun Tzu. So if your opponent's plan is to wage a series of ground-based offensives to seize key territory while sieging cities, using artillery, missiles, and airstrikes to hold the Ukrainian population at risk, which is a war crime, you have to attack that plan. And I think there's a couple things we can do to do that. One, we know the delivery of anti-tank guided weapons works, so keep them coming. They'll need to come by the thousands, and that will require defense strategists to think about the defense industrial bases. Someone right now is running around figuring out how many Javelin missiles we can actually produce in American industry per year. And that's actually not an easy question to answer. The next level up means we have to probably shift a lot of Soviet-era surface-to-air weapon systems to Ukraine. More Russian jets have been shot down with surface-to-air missiles than they have by Ukrainian jets. And these weapon systems have an advantage that they can actually, at times, successfully engage cruise missiles. So surface-to-air missiles are actually more important than the jets that drew so much attention. And third, expand upon the delivery of what are called suicide drones or loitering munitions to include higher class weapons. So U.S. military said we were sending what are called Switchblade. So this is essentially the
actually,
equivalent.
Ben, I did want to ask you about those Switchblade. These are 100 of those Switchblade drones going to Ukraine. Explain what they are first, and then what impact they might have.
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, I get excited talking about war, even though it's tragic. So the Switchblade is where we were going to go next. So these are actually essentially a small warhead that actually can only attack a few kilometers out. It's actually a pretty small munition. What we probably need to send are closer to what's called the Hero 120. And interestingly enough, for your viewers are a bit more in tune with current politics and defense debates, these are the weapon systems gaining a lot of attention in the Marine Corps as part of its new force design initiative. So this is a loitering munition that in theory can extend much farther than a Switchblade and has about 3 times the warhead. So it actually is similar to a Javelin or higher. So the idea would be to use these loitering munitions in swarms that essentially could attack, whether it's tanks or ideally artillery firing positions. It would give Ukrainians a cheap form of precision strike that allows them to keep pushing artillery further away from their cities, which is why you've seen the Ukrainians take really bold counteroffensives around Kiev to push Russian artillery away. So those loitering munitions are actually key. And in addition to that, I saw some footage you put up of UCAV, unmanned aerial vehicles, is to get partners like Turkey to continue supplying critical assets like the Ukrainian, basically the Ukrainian are using Turkish drones to interdict Russian sites. So going back to those 3 things, continue sending anti-tank guided weapons, expand the delivery of surface-to-air missiles, and start to really field loitering munitions.
And what's the timeline to get those Switchblade drones over to Ukraine?
That's a logistics question. I mean, FedEx doesn't deliver to war zones, so it really is up to really the unsung heroes of NATO, and that's logisticians. How rapidly can we move goods by air, by sea, by rail to intermediate staging areas, and then put them on trucks where we push them to the Polish border, and then there has to be a transfer of custody. Someone from Ukraine has to take it that last tactical mile into Ukraine and then distribute it from there. And by the way, this creates a whole new campaign dimension. Russia will start increasing its strikes in the West to interdict these supply lines.
All right. Well, we're watching this as it unfolds. Ben, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.